Channeling is when a person is able to go into a meditative or trance-like state in order to convey messages from the spirit world. Some people may visit a medium or attend a seance in the hope of being able to communicate with a loved one. In other cases, a message may be relayed to a person in other unusual ways that they had least expected, where they have no scientific explanation for what had happened. The following true story is about a young Australian man with a tragic past that received an unexpected message from his late father, which led to the strangest experience of his life when walking along a quiet beach in Australia with his girlfriend. In the early 1980s in Melbourne, Australia, a young boy by the name of Colin Brooks had a personal tragedy when his father tragically took his own life in their family car in the garage of their home. Colin never fully recovered from the horrific event. A few years later, Colin decided to move as far away from Melbourne as possible and moved to the far north of Queensland near Cairns, where he managed to start a new life and become part of the local community in the hope of leaving his tragic past back in Melbourne. His life would again be changed one night whilst walking along the beach with his girlfriend on Magnetic Island, just off the coast of Townsville in northern Queensland. Colin appeared to be in a cheerful mood as he strolled along the beach with his girlfriend, but deep in his thoughts he was unable to shake off the terrible images of his father, along with his tragic ending that continued to haunt him, even though it was many years since his father had taken his own life. Then suddenly in the distance they could see the glow of a campfire, and as they drew closer they came upon a group of people sitting in a circle around a fire. They had never met these people before, which was not unusual because North Queensland was a tourist hub with many people visiting. As they approached the group of strangers around the campfire, Colin had no idea that a most extraordinary event of his life was about to happen. As he drew closer to the people, there appeared to be an eerie silence, and the only sound that could be heard was the crackling of the fire and the crashing of the waves nearby. The strangest thing was that as he was observing the people around the fire, images of his father's last moments sitting in his car in the family garage was replaying in his mind. As they approached the group of people, the first sign came that something strange was about to happen when a man in the group looked up and said, "Hello Colin, we've been expecting you." The couple looked at each other in complete bemusement, and Colin said, "How do these people know my name? I've never met them before." It was as if they were waiting specifically for him to arrive. Suddenly, a woman in the group said to Colin, "Remember son, always take responsibility for your own life." He did not know it at the moment, but Colin was to hear the most intimate thoughts and details of his late father that would come from the mouth of one of the women in the circle when she said, "Your mother and I may have grown apart over the years, but I've always loved her too." Then her voice changed, and her face also appeared to change, and she said, "Sometimes life gets a bit too much, and you can't cope, so I hope you don't hate me for that. I've made mistakes." She then spoke in detail of his childhood, which was a childhood he had never revealed to anyone. Only his parents could have known the exact details of what was being said. She then said that, "I want you to understand what happened, and I love you very much, and you must move on with your life. Do it for me and for yourself." And she used phrases exactly as his father used her. Colin explained that his father always called him a whinger as a child, and the woman had used the same comments, such as "stop whinging and get on with your life." The woman then apologised and spoke of love, and said, "I've always loved you, but I didn't always show it, but I've always loved you and always will. I want you to tell Mum and the rest of the family that I'm sorry, and I love you all very much. It's now up to you to look after the family." His father's parting words were, "You may never hear from me again, but I will always be there for you." Before that moment, Colin Brooks claimed he was a total skeptic, but could not understand how one night came upon strangers on the beach who managed to convey messages from a father that had died many years before, and claimed that he had never come upon anything that was so real for him. So who were the people sitting around the fire on the beach, and where did they come from? Were they aware of what was happening, or were they somehow all in a trance-like state, unaware of what was happening to them, as they imparted messages from his father? If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Shay Hudson works as a psychotherapist and clinical hypnotherapist in Atlanta, Georgia, who specializes in spiritually transformative experiences and is a reviewer from the Journal of Exceptional Experiences and Psychology. Shay tells the following spiritual encounter he had had after his grandmother passed away. Shay grew up in Milledgeville, Georgia, and every Sunday after church, his parents would take him and his brother to visit their granny, Annie Dean Garner. Her small and quaint house was filled with photos of the family, and he especially liked her purple turquoise couch in the living room. His granny was a kind, sweet lady with long brown and grey hair that was braided. Shay would enjoy the day he spent at her house, where he liked to play and help around the house. A few years later, when Shay was away at college, he received tragic news from his parents that his beloved granny had been diagnosed with colon cancer, leaving both he and his family devastated, where his mother rang and suggested he should go immediately to the hospital to visit her. Shay went to the hospital immediately and remembered seeing her lying in bed, and although she was very ill, she still had the energy to smile at him and tell him she was extremely happy to see him. Unfortunately, that was the last time that he would see his beloved grandmother alive. A few days later, hospital advised his parents that she had gone into a coma. His parents then contacted Shay, who then rushed to the hospital. He saw his father in the parking lot, looking extremely concerned, and did not notice his son as he walked to the car. Shay raced into the hospital to hopefully see his granny one last time, and saw his mother sitting in a chair crying. She told Shay that she was holding her hand when she took her last breath. She said that his father had left because he could not face seeing his mother pass away. One Sunday afternoon, a few years after his granny had passed, Shay was feeling tired and decided to sit on the couch and meditate. But what happened next was to transform his life in a deep and profound way. As Shay was moving into a deep state of meditation, with his eyes closed, he began to feel his body less and less. As he went deeper into a meditative state, his head began to nod. Then his head suddenly jerked. This appeared to wake him, where he looked up and stared at the couch, but something did not look right. His couch was normally a beige colour, but was now a turquoise blue. He then lifted his head to look around, and his vision appeared cloudy, but he could just make out the shape of a person sitting across from him. Then a very familiar voice sounded in his head and told him to focus. He did what the voice in his head requested, and his cloudy vision slowly began to clear, and he could now clearly see someone sitting on the other side of the room. And to his utter amazement, it was his beloved Gran, sitting in a chair and smiling at him. Shay could not quite believe what he was now seeing, and first believed that it was all in his head. Then his vision became cloudy again, and he heard his granny's voice say, "It's your own fear and doubt getting in the way, and you need to focus again." Shay again focused on the figure in front of him, and his vision suddenly cleared. His granny was sitting a few feet away. She was smiling and staring at him. Her hair was still neatly braided, just as she used to wear it, and she was wearing a beautiful white gown. He told his granny that he missed her and loved her, and she responded likewise. He asked her how she thought he was doing spiritually, and she told him he was doing very well, but said that he should stay away from theological debates. He knew exactly what she was talking about because at the time he'd been having a strong religious debate with a friend of his. He acknowledged what his granny had said, and he understood that it was not his place to tell anyone that their belief was wrong. She again told him that she loved him and to take care of his father if he ever got sick. He said he promised to take care of his dad and her son, and in order to prove that this conversation had not just taken place in his head, he asked his granny to verify everything. She then mentally led Shay into the kitchen and showed him a stove, where there were onions and squash cooking on the stove. She said, "Ask your mother about the onions and squash she cooked today." He said he would immediately do that and told her again that he loved her. He then came out of his deep meditation and waited until he was completely alert. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he thought to do was to check to see whether the conversation he had had with his granny had really taken place, and quickly rang his parents. He was in a state of anticipation when his father answered the phone, and he immediately asked them whether they'd eaten onions and squash that day. His father said, "What are you, a mind reader?" Shay replied that he would not believe him if he told him of what had happened, and then asked that his mother be put on the phone. He asked her the same question, and she said, "Yes, I cooked onions and squash today. How did you know that?" He said, "I saw Granny, and she told me what you did today. Granny also asked me to take care of Dad if he ever gets sick." Shay was extremely grateful for seeing his grandmother again, especially because he had been too late to say goodbye to her when she passed at the hospital, even though the meeting was an unordinary and altered state of consciousness. But it really felt like a face-to-face encounter. Shay's experience had a powerful transformative effect on his life, and he no longer feared death. He now felt certain that there is an afterlife, and we continue our lives in another way. The knowledge that his granny gave him in their encounter is what parapsychologists call vertical evidence. His granny shared convincing information that he was immediately able to verify by asking what they'd cooked that day. His granny did not come back with secrets of the universe or with any religious righteousness, but did tell him to avoid religious debates and was guiding him in another spiritual direction. Shay believes that his grandmother came back to give him a very simple message of taking care of her son and his father, and was a message of love. He believed that the profound experience helped reconcile his emotions with the loss of his grandmother. Of course, the encounter never took away the initial grief of saying goodbye, but had a lasting effect of creating a strong ability within himself to understand and better cope with the eventual passing of others close to him, as well as his own mortality. Alex and Karen Moss had married in their early 20s and purchased a 17th-century stone-built house in Cirencester in the heart of the Cotswolds. Cirencester is a market town in Gloucestershire, England, 80 miles west of London. Alex was a builder and used his skills to renovate the 17th-century building. The couple were financially secure and also had the support of both their parents. After 2 years of marriage, Karen gave birth to a baby girl whom they named Carol Ann. 2 weeks after Carol Ann's 5th birthday, she tragically contracted meningitis and died a short time later. The once happy couple were now devastated and cut themselves off from family and friends, and the life that was once happy and contented has suddenly changed. Even if their friends did visit them, they had nothing to say, and the atmosphere was dark and bleak. They'd even given up their hobbies, as Alex would regularly play golf on Sundays and Karen would love to go horse riding on Saturdays, but that too ceased. Karen had even stopped going to church, as her faith was now shattered. The only time she went to church was to sit on a wooden bench, which was a short distance from their daughter's grave. Karen felt that she needed some sort of affirmation that Karen Ann was now in some form of heavenly existence and was being cared for. Karen's visit to the graveyard and the wooden bench became a regular event, where she would sit and mourn her loss. Karen had always believed in an afterlife and was now looking for some kind of sign that would offer her reassurance. 7 months after her daughter's death, an unusual incident happened at their home. Alex was always losing his car keys and would spend ages trying to recover his steps as to where he'd last put them down. One afternoon, as he was frantically searching, he asked his wife whether she'd seen his missing keys, and then both Alex and Karen went searching high and low for them. Then a sudden thought came into Karen's mind, and she walked over to a wooden shelf and looked inside the flower jar that sat on the shelf. She then put a hand in and extracted the car keys. They both looked at each other in utter amazement, because the flower jar that held the keys had been a gift from their daughter. Whenever the keys were left lying around, Karen Ann would always pick them up and place them into the flower jar for safekeeping. Karen did not know why she'd had that sudden urge to look into the jar, and neither of them ever, even inadvertently, had put anything inside it. Was this the sign that Karen had been looking for? And for the next few days, her hopes had started to look up, but the optimism did not last long, and over time, doubt and depression crept back into her life. One morning, a few weeks later, Karen was vacuuming the bedroom and noticed that something was not quite right. She then walked over to the dressing table and saw her daughter's floral makeup bag was sitting there open and full. Karen Ann had always been fascinated by her mother's makeup bag and what was inside of it, so Karen decided to buy her daughter her own makeup bag full of toy replicas of what was in her own bag. When Karen had used up her old containers, she would wash them and place them inside her daughter's now bulging makeup bag. The makeup bag was definitely not on the dressing table when she awoke that morning, and the last time she remembered seeing it was when she'd packed it up with her other toys and placed it in her daughter's bedroom after she had died. Karen then sat on the bed and wept. She could not bring herself to touch it and had to ask her husband to put it back into the daughter's bedroom. If this was a sign from her daughter, on this occasion, Karen had not accepted it. It only caused her more grief. On Easter Sunday, Karen was tempted to go to church, as she always used to do. But because her faith was now gone after the loss of her daughter, they instead took some flowers to their daughter's grave and stood there and held hands. Although it was a perfect sunny day, Karen was numb to the surrounding beauty and felt empty, wishing she were in a grave next to her daughter. The couple then made their way down a narrow pathway and did not notice an elderly lady approaching them from the opposite direction. And as she grew closer, she stopped and smiled at them and said, "What a beautiful daughter you have," and continued to smile. Karen felt her blood run cold and gripped her husband's hand tightly and could not bring herself to utter a single word. She just looked at the elderly lady as if she were crazy. The lady could see the strange expression on Karen's face and slowly peered around the side of Karen and said, "I cannot see her now," and looked puzzled. This caused both Karen and Alex to look around themselves. They found nothing before Karen said to the lady, "What did she look like?" The elderly lady was taken aback by Karen's strange behaviour and hesitated for a moment before continuing. She then proceeded to describe the young girl as tallish, young and pretty, with blonde hair tied back with a pink ribbon. She was wearing a pink jacket and white dress with pink stripes, along with white knee socks and shoes. The young girl had been skipping a few steps behind them, but then appeared to dart behind a headstone. The lady assumed she was playing a game with them and wanted the parents to look for her. But when the girl failed to reappear from behind the headstone, and the parents looked shocked by what she had told them, she had cause for concern as to what she had just stumbled upon. In a moment of clarity, the elderly woman suddenly realised that she must have seen a ghost, something of which she had never before seen in her life. Instead of elation, she now regretted her observation and realised she had only caused distress to the couple. Karen stood there and openly wept, and when she could finally bring herself to speak, she said to the elderly lady that she had done them a wonderful service. It was the sign they were looking for, and now both had the will to move on with their life. When the couple arrived home, Karen realised it was rude not to have asked the elderly woman her name. Karen then went up to her daughter's bedroom and opened the wardrobe and took out the white dress with the pink stripes that had been her daughter's favourite dress. The dress was the exact same dress that the elderly woman had described in the churchyard. Karen finally had the sign she'd been looking for and was now certain she had not completely lost her daughter. Mary and Kevin Furman were married in 1939 and moved into a picturesque cottage that was located in a small Yorkshire village in northern England. They'd only been married for 16 years when Kevin developed throat cancer that was terminal, and after a long and painful illness, died on Christmas Eve 1955. Mary was now alone with a 14-year-old son to support and felt that life would now be difficult without her beloved partner. As each year passed, Mary dreaded Christmas Eve, and people would regularly invite her around to their house. But Mary felt it was a kind of duty to stay at home in the cottage and reminisce about the happy years they'd spent together, as short as they were. However, one year, only 2 weeks before Christmas, Mary decided that this year she would not spend Christmas alone and put an end to her yearly self-exile. Her husband had now been gone for 13 years and it was time to move on. This year she would spend Christmas Eve with her sister Joan and then spend Christmas with her son Michael, who is now 27 years old and married with 6-year-old twins. She then visited her sister Joan, who lived in the same village, and told her the good news that she would be spending Christmas Eve with her. Joan was ecstatic with her sister's decision, and like her sister, was also a widow, who had for many years had to also bring her son up alone. Joan had a 13-year-old son called Gordon, but unlike Michael, seemed a confirmed bachelor who lived at home with his mother. When Gordon heard that his auntie would be staying with them, he too was excited and offered to pick her up on Christmas Eve. After they had had lunch, Joan offered to walk back with her sister to the cottage, as she was going in that direction and wanted to visit the shops. The weather outside was freezing cold, as the sisters had to hold on to each other in case one should slip on the icy pavement. As they came to a bend in the road, Mary suddenly had an unnerving sensation of a loud buzzing in her ears, but after a couple of minutes it thankfully passed. As they turned the bend, they came upon the village church, where her husband Kevin was buried, and in the dark, bleak weather it had a strange, surreal appearance about it. Mary then felt entranced as she stared at the church and then looked at the stone wall that surrounded it. It felt to Mary as if time was standing still, and then let out a sudden gasp and quickly grabbed her sister's arm. Joan then looked at her sister, concerned about her health, but all Mary could do was shake her head. Joan looked across at the cafe and quickly ushered her sister into the small shop. As Mary was seated near the window, she then rubbed off the condensation and peered out at the church and the stone wall. She was relieved she could no longer see the apparitions that had suddenly appeared to her when she was outside with her sister. Mary would never forget what he had just seen, and in the years that her husband had been gone, often wished that he would appear to her, or at least make his presence felt, but he never did. But after all these years, she suddenly sees him, and now wished she hadn't, as it had given her quite a shock. She then closed her eyes and allowed the ghostly scene to come back to her. 1 minute she was staring across at the church, and then something drew her to the stone wall in front, and there he was, her husband Kevin, with his wavy brown hair and pleasant smiling face. He was wearing his favourite pair of old trousers and fawn polo-neck sweater that she'd knitted for him. He looked so real that she was left gasping. He was waving to her and smiling, but she was unprepared to what he did next. He was jerking his thumb down to get her attention to who was sitting beside him. As she looked across at the other figure, her face then drained of all its colour, for she was now looking at Gordon, Joan's son, who was also smiling and waving at her. Her sister then returned to the table with coffee and toasted fruit buns, but Mary was still in shock at what she had just seen, and then pushed it away and believed she must have imagined it all. After all, she'd only seen Gordon that very morning at her sister's house, looking young, healthy, and alive. Joan looked across at her sister, still concerned, but Mary just told her she had suddenly had a sharp pain, but now it was gone. She was too frightened to tell her sister about the apparitions. Mary did not sleep well that night when the incident at the church continued to replay in her mind. Christmas Eve arrived and Mary packed a few clothes in preparation for a stay at her son's house. Shortly before lunch, Gordon arrived to pick her up in his van, as he'd promised, and loaded up a suitcase along with gifts. Mary thought to herself how considerate he was, and thought one day he would be a good husband and father. That evening, Mary and her sister sat side by side eating snacks and gazed upon the Christmas tree as wind and snow howled outside. They were content just to chat and listen to music. It just so happens that Gordon was out with his friends that evening, but even if he wasn't home, it would not have made much difference, as he was a very quiet person, and they would have forgotten that it was even in the same room. Later that evening, Joan suggested they go out to the local inn, called the White Hart, for the last hour, but the fact that the weather was freezing, Mary would have preferred to have stayed at home in the warm. However, it was Christmas Eve, so she agreed to accompany her sister. They rugged up in warm clothing and braved the elements, and thankfully the inn was not too far away. As they arrived, they found the inn smoky, noisy and packed, but nevertheless were able to find a seat. Joan then commented that her son Gordon must be in the pub somewhere, as she saw his van outside. Mary then looked across the other side of the room and noticed some activity, as a man was trying to get the barman's attention. After he managed to get his message across, he then made his way across the room, but did not initially notice Mary and Joan sitting at the table. As he came past, Joan quickly grabbed his arm and said, "Hello, Terry, is our Gordon with you?" The young man just stared at the two women, and his jaw suddenly dropped. Beads of sweat were trickling down his forehead, and he looked vague and uncertain and panicky. He then said, "Oh, Mrs. Alcaster, can you come outside?" Joan then sensed something was wrong and looked across at her sister with apprehension. Joan then followed the young man, and Mary was close behind her. They'd left their coats on the chair, and an icy blast of cold air met them as they went outside, but at this stage they appeared impervious to the cold. They were both standing at the door of the inn and looked across at a figure sitting against a brick wall, and his head was slumped forward on his chest. They could plainly make out that it was Gordon. All three of them were just standing rigid at the door as the snow fluttered down and the wind blew. Terry was shaking, said that they'd come a couple of hours ago with Sharon and Ellen, and then Gordon said he didn't feel too good. So Terry went outside with him, where Gordon looked terrible. They'd not had much to drink, and then Terry called for an ambulance. She was afraid to walk across to Gordon as he looked unconscious. Joan then walked across to her son, who looked strange and grey-looking. She then knelt down beside her son and gently lifted his head, while at the same time the ambulance could be heard in the distance. Joan could plainly see that the son was not alive, as all three suddenly held their breath. All of a sudden, Joan let out an agonising scream that chilled Mary's blood, and it was too much for her to take. Joan then desperately tried to get air into her son's lungs, but in vain. Mary was now numb with shock as the buzzing returned to her ears, and she fought to stop herself from fainting. Mary was well aware that it was Christmas Eve, and her sister would now share that awful date with her, as the date that each lost a loved one. Mary thought that one day she may be brave enough to tell her sister about her apparition and premonition, where she saw her deceased husband standing next to her nephew Gordon at the church wall. At the time of the following strange incident in 2005, Janice Heafy-Durham was a publisher at the Sacramento Bee newspaper. She considered herself a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. That is, until her husband Max passed away. What she saw made her question her previously held views about life beyond death. On Sunday, March the 8th, 2005, Janice was walking to the kitchen in her home in Sacramento to make herself a snack and stopped in the bathroom in the guest bedroom. She suddenly noticed a handprint in the mirror that was not there an hour earlier when she was brushing her hair. It had simply appeared out of nowhere. She stood frozen to the spot for at least a minute and could make no sense of it at all. In all her 53 years, she had never experienced anything that made her question reality. She realised she was staring at something that was totally unexplainable and wondered whether she was losing her mind. Had someone somehow entered the house to play a trick? But her son Tanner and she would have noticed if anyone had opened the patio door. It was a large handprint, but did not look like an ordinary handprint, but appeared to be made of a soft, white, powdery substance. And the actual bone structure made it look like an X-ray. She then drew closer to the handprint and could see that it was a hand of a man, as the fingers and palm had a masculine shape. Janice just looked at the handprint in the mirror that was perfectly formed. To make matters spookier, seemed to appear out of nowhere. Janice was both startled and curious, and wondered where the hell it could have come from. She thought, how could a human hand show the transparency of an X-ray? Strangely though, the handprint appeared to be the accumulation of other strange things that had been happening around the house, such as unexplainable flickering lights and the clock stopping the moment Max died. Janice was talking about her husband, Max Besler, who had died in the living room exactly 1 year to the day. She then asked her 14-year-old son Tanner to come into the bathroom and asked whether he had placed his hand on the mirror, and was thinking to herself whether she was now becoming a bit hysterical. However, for her own peace of mind, she asked Tanner to hold his right hand up next to the powdered right handprint, so as to compare them both. She found that the handprint on the mirror was much larger and the hand was a different shape. They both just stared at the handprint and were speechless, and then slowly turned their heads to face each other. Were they both witnessing something paranormal? They could not comprehend what they were looking at, and immediately searched for answers. Tanner was equally confused and frightened, asking his mother, where did it come from, as he turned back to look at the handprint. She tried to remain calm for her son, but had to admit she had no idea where it came from. She searched her mind for answers, and then said, do you think this may be related to Max because today is the anniversary of his passing? They'd only been married for 4 years when he'd been diagnosed with esophageal cancer at the age of 56, and her son was devastated, and even though Max was his stepfather, they were very close. Tanner thought about his mother's question and asked, How could Max make the handprint if he's not alive? Janice realised she had to remain calm, but continued to be inquisitive. She told her son to go outside and shoot some hoops to take his mind off of it. Janice then grabbed a camera and took several photographs so as to document the strange event. She later wished she'd taken a sample of the powdery substance to have it analysed or have a proper forensic examination of the fingerprints, but at the time she was too emotional and it hadn't occurred to her. She continued to ask herself the question of the timing of the handprint showing up on Max's death, and was trying to reach out to her and maybe let her and Tanner know that he was okay. She remembered exactly what her husband's hand looked like, and the handprint on the mirror compared very closely with the shape of Max's hands. Janice had absolutely no explanation for the strange phenomenon, and it did not fit in with the traditional Presbyterian values with what she grew up with, and the fact that her father was a minister devoted to his particular faith, which would not have fitted in with anything paranormal. Janice herself did not share her father's traditional values, where her thinking was less restricted somewhat, and her faith was not essential to her life, and what had happened did not have a simple explanation relating to heaven or the afterlife. She felt she had experienced a completely different dimension and was confused by the mystery. She asked herself whether he was a ghost, and the fact that he had died in the home could mean he was still around. Was he trying to give her a message that there was more to life, and had he figured out a way to communicate with her? Nevertheless, Janice was still frightened because she was entering the unknown. She could also not dwell on the incident or be distracted. Instead, she compartmentalized the curious event and put it aside when she was in a better frame of mind. And the most important fact was that she had a son to raise. At the time of the incident, Janice was publisher and president of the Sacramento Bee and was a public figure, and her life was under the microscope, and she did not want any criticism that could emanate from disclosing such a strange event, so she kept it private. She did not know what to do with the handprint and just left it on the mirror and discussed it with her housekeeper, Helen Dennis. Helen had been close to her husband and also helped him through his illness, and she felt she was part of the family, and Janice trusted her. After showing Helen the handprint, she was amazed but calm, and they just stared at it together. They both still wondered whether it was a sign from Max, since it did appear on his anniversary, but the fact that it had been there for 3 days, she saw no reason to keep it any longer, and told Helen to clean it off. Helen duly moved the print with Windex, but said it did not remove easily and had to really scrub. Although Janice remarried in 2008, strange things continued to happen, such as a strange footprint appearing on a bed at their holiday home, and the carpet would move by itself. On the 2nd anniversary of his death, powdery images again appeared on the mirror, and on the 3rd anniversary, another handprint appeared. In hindsight, Janice said that it was a powerful image that left an indelible imprint on her mind, and went on to write a book about her experience called The Hand on the Mirror, a true story of life beyond death.
Dr. Francis Edwards was a doctor and alienist who contributed this story to an anthology of true ghost experiences early last century. Dr. Edwards was for some time the medical superintendent at Camberwell House, a London mental health asylum. He would often talk to an elderly man by the name of Mr. Rowe, who regularly visited one of his patients. On one occasion, this man asked Edwards if he believed in ghosts, to which he answered, of course, it was impossible to deny their existence. Rowe claimed to have witnessed an extraordinary supernatural phenomenon in his own home, which he had written down, although never revealing his experience to anyone. He was particularly concerned about being laughed at, and so had documented the occurrences in painstaking detail as if to verify their truthfulness. He later sent Edwards a 200-page manuscript of his family's experience. Rowe's family had lived in a now old terrace house in Bath, England, for generations. However, as a young man, he had possessed a restless soul and spirit of adventure. This had seen him heading for Australia during the gold rush of 1850. In Australia, Roe married and raised a family, while, in the meantime, his own father passed away and left him the family home in Bath. Not wanting to return, Roe asked his lawyer to ensure that the house was kept in good order and a responsible caretaker placed in charge. One of Roe's sons later passed away, with the young man's wife surviving him by only a year, leaving his then 7-year-old granddaughter Mary an orphan. Roe then became a guardian of the girl, whom he was at pains to describe as a happy little person and perfectly normal child. He found himself devoted to Mary, who he decided would benefit from an English upbringing. Fortunately, his house in Bath was well ready to step back into, and the rest of his children independent and leading their own lives. So Roe and his granddaughter Mary made their journey back to the mother country. Mary loved her new home in Bath, where she would often spend time in the garden and play with her dolls in the library every evening. One night, after several months, when she and her grandfather were sitting in the library together, she asked him whoever was the old gentleman sitting in the big chair with ears. She described the man she saw as being oddly dressed, to which Mr. Roe told her that there was no one there at all. Mary insisted, saying that the man had just nodded his head and she believed that he knew her. She remarked that she hadn't even seen him come into the room. Changing the subject, Roe asked Mary to check on the mail, and when she returned, she commented that the old man was no longer there. However, the visitor kept returning, and Mary described his appearance in such minute detail that Roe became reluctantly convinced that the apparition was his own father. The man had continued to wear clothes fashionable in the early 19th century, refusing to update his wardrobe over time. However, Roe did not want his granddaughter to think that her friend was a ghost, and so hoped that the situation would eventually normalise. He could not think why his father would come back to haunt his former library, or why he wanted to get in touch with Mary. As the weeks went by, Mary and her invisible great-grandfather carried on long conversations, which he reported back to Roe, as he was never able to see or hear the apparition. Roe would ask Mary to question her great-grandfather about family matters known only to himself and the deceased spirit, whose answers largely dispelled any doubt about the presence actually being him. However, one day Roe posed a question that completely convinced him. He suggested to Mary that she ask her great-grandpapa what happens to babies who pass away before they have even opened their eyes. Mary addressed the unseen occupant of the big chair with ears, then paused for a few minutes as he seemingly answered. She finally whispered that great-grandpapa had told her that stillborn children go on living in heaven, but she asked, "What does stillborn mean?" Roe explained the meaning of the word, and from then on was convinced of his father's presence and connection with Mary. This was because he knew that the small girl had never before heard the word stillborn. He was now convinced that the ghostly conversations were real. The seasons passed, and Mary's first English spring arrived when she was to report a conversation that shocked Roe. She related that her great-grandpapa had told her that he would not be visiting the house anymore because she was soon going to live with him. Roe's heart stood still as he understood his father's meaning only too well. Mary had unknowingly received her summons to another world. Her great-grandfather never appeared again, and within a month she had followed him to the other side. Why, we are not told, but there were still many childhood illnesses during that time. While Roe's account of these events had been mislaid by Dr. Edwards, one detail really stood out to him. Mary's great-grandfather had told her that he had visited Australia, and he had described to her her father's and grandfather's houses in Adelaide, Australia. As he had never during his lifetime left England, these revelations were seen as extraordinary by Roe. It certainly does seem like this kindly ghost befriended his great-granddaughter in order to soften the passage of her soul's impending migration.